Yes.
We're ready, Kurt.
Good morning, everyone. Do we know if we have everyone who we are expecting?
I believe so, Mr. Chair. We do have, there is a quorum.
If we're expecting no one else, my name's Ron Gacious, and I will call the June meeting of the City of Lawrence Affordable Housing Advisory Board in session. And give me just a couple of moments to get my collective act together here. Get my desktop working. Staff, had we received any public comments in advance of this month's meeting?
I do not believe we have.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to make a brief statement. The events of the past couple of weeks have shined a bright light on the racial inequities of America. The trust of many Americans in our ability to address social justice issues, and the deep divide among Americans about how we should respond to these critically important issues has made real progress really difficult. But I believe there's a growing consensus amongst many that we've reached a tipping point and that a real opportunity exists to address the equity issues that have separated the races in our country. I'm hoping and I'm confident that the work of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board can help us make some progress. And I would urge all of us to acknowledge and be sensitive to the racial inequities in the environment in which we're working and use that information to help us make better decisions. We absolutely need to be part of the solution and not contribute to the problem. I'm sure you all agree with those general commitments, but I would ask that anytime you see me or anyone else in our advisory board not living up to those broad obligations, that we call each other out. We really need to do better. We have resources at our disposal that we are expected to make recommendations on how to spend them. And I think the issue of racial inequities, economic inequities, how we've treated minorities in the past, that should inform our decision making. And we can do better. And I'm confident that we have the opportunity to do so. We're fortunate to live in a community that is highly charged and sensitive and eager to work on these issues. And I think that whatever recommendations we can make that help address the issues of racial inequity in our community will be appreciated by our commissioners. And that's all I've got to say. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
If I could just make a reminder here at the beginning of the meeting for everyone, this is Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Just as a reminder, and I know everybody's doing a great job of this, if you're not speaking, if you would keep your microphones muted. And because we're in this format currently, I would remind everyone that every time you speak, if you would announce your name and your title if appropriate, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. We'll move to item B on our agenda, which is approval of the minutes. Chair would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of our prior meeting, our May 11th meeting.
Thomas Howe, Lawrence Board of Realtors, so moved.
Do we have a second?
Rebecca Buford, tenants to homeowners, second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Next agenda item, C1, is our monthly financial report. Staff?
Good morning, everyone. Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all to walk through briefly our monthly financial report. I'm actually going to show you a slightly different version that we included for this month's report given your next agenda item. One of the things that our interactive report doesn't show is the fund balance, which I think is a really critical component for the next agenda item in particular. So wanted to kind of show you a version of the financial report that looks a lot more similar to what we have in the annual report document than what we have typically online. So I do want to note that these are unaudited numbers. We're in the process of working through and finalizing our audit, but these should be really close, but there might be a few adjustments here and there. But the fund balance that we currently have is $640,000 in the Housing Trust Fund. You can see so far as of the end of May, these were the revenues that we have seen, and you can see that in the online report. So that the revenue side doesn't look any different, which you can see the total here. One thing that does look a little different is on the expense side. In our online report, we really just have these prior year payments because we don't yet have all of the agreements for those following projects actually in place. So we haven't technically encumbered those funds yet, but that will be happening in the coming weeks and months. And so what this report really strives to do is highlight and note each of these three projects that we don't yet see in our online financial report. This emergency request is meant to show you the impact if you were to move forward with the second item on your agenda today, just so that you all can kind of get a full picture of what the finances look like. And then we have $1,000 for investing fees as well. So total expenses that we're looking at if you were to move forward is $1.3 million. With our fund balance, with the revenues that we have received to date. That means as of 5/31 of 2020, there would be $79,000 in the Housing Trust Fund. So I want to talk a little bit about sales tax as a whole. I know we had some discussions about this at our last meeting. We have received the May sales tax figures for the Housing Trust Fund. That was $71,000. And really, in terms of what we budgeted for the Housing Trust Fund, we are now in line with what we expect to receive. The caveat that I would share and the big however with that statement is that we were looking to actually exceed our revenue projections. And now in 1 month, we went from being ahead of where we thought we were going to be right in line to where we thought we were going to be. And as a city, we're really seeing that we're in line with what we received in 2019 for sales tax. So 1 month does not make a trend. It is lower than what was initially anticipated when we put together the budget about a year ago, but just wanted to kind of give that context and that overview that, you know, we're continuing to monitor all of those sales tax proceeds, and we'll keep you guys informed as those dollars come in. But as it stands today, there's about $79,000 that would be remaining in the Housing Advisory Board fund, provided you did move forward with the request. That is your second agenda item. So I would be happy to answer any questions, and if you want me to go back and look at our other report that we typically do, I'm happy to walk through that as well.
Are there any questions for Danielle? Seeing none, let's move to the second item on our agenda, C2, which is the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority Project Able Emergency Funding Request and consideration of a recommendation for funding to the City Commission.
This is Shannon. I'm going to get off because that's what I'm supposed to do. And Nikki Danicki is there and on and will be addressing this issue.
Thank you, Shannon.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on your agenda today. I'm reaching out in behalf of the individuals served by the Project ABLE. It's a salvation program, permanent supportive housing, and it's been a program in our community for many years, over 15 years at this point. And this has been funded each year by a COC renewal grant that comes directly to our balance estate through a HUD grant each year. Lawrence Douglas County also has a permanent supportive housing program, the Hope House. So fortunately for us this year, we were able to get the renewal and expansion. But the HUD has been changing its criteria for awards, putting strict outcomes. And our balance estate was moved to start rating programs throughout the balance estate with a competitive scoring system. And the history behind that is to help our communities get more funding from HUD, and without that competition, they were not going to be awarding new funds. Unfortunately, for our community, we lost 14 units. We gained 2, but we lost 14 through the COC grant. This news came to me in April, mid to late April. A regional coordinator for Salvation Army reached out asking me for some ideas for solutions. So we worked together to look for community resources to help these 14 families who are imminently at risk at losing their housing. And all 14 families are people who are served through this grant. Every family has a disability, so they're either on zero or fixed income. And so as we were looking, there would not be a way they'd be self-sufficient without subsidized housing. We reached out to many of our community partners at Burton Ash, Catholic Charities, to look for funding solutions. We looked at the Salvation Army's budget about possible funding solutions, and we did not come across a solution that would fit this need at this time. And if you have the handout, you'll see this project, these individuals served are being subsidized at $11,000 a year. The total grant was $240,000 they lost, but that would include case management services as well. All individuals in this program had to have been chronically homeless at intake and with disabilities. And hold on, we've got the demographics.
Question for Patrick Kelly. Patrick, is my understanding that the Douglas County Commission has already taken an action on a similar request?
No, we have not. It's actually on our agenda for Wednesday.
For Wednesday?
The Project Able grant is on our agenda for this Wednesday. Yeah.
Okay.
We reached out to the county for half of the request. I'll explain the plan here in a minute. And so these families are all extremely low income, and they make up 27 individuals total. 15 of those are adults and 12 are children. Half of the adult household members are also minority, at risk for other unequal housing opportunities. So the program is permanent supportive housing, and these individuals are going to be up for losing their housing at nothing they did to deserve that. And so we have 2 households who have been in this program for over 7 years, and all but 2 households have been in it for a year at least. And so the way it works is that Salvation Army is a leaseholder with private landlords. So rent and utilities are included in the cost of the program, and the individuals are assessed at what an affordable rate would be. So they do pay some of their own rent at 30%. So the funding is going to end at the end of June, which is a really quick turnaround. So this is actually a pretty imminent crisis for these families in our community. They're trying to get HUD approval for 1 more month to give us time, but she has not heard whether or not that's been accepted. She's hoping, Jennifer, the regional director, is hoping to know sometime this week. And so I've worked with them to make sure they're getting people referred for our ongoing subsidy through Section 8 and transitional housing. And I also was getting with Jennifer to see what their case management needs are going to be and how we could address those. She had explained that many of these individuals have worked in the program for many years and have really stabilized through case management. And she believes that they could be stabilized outside of the more intensive permanent supportive housing model through partners. I've reached out. Bert Nash is going to be working with a few of these families. Family Promise indicated they may be able to help. Salvation Army, through one of their other programs, can help provide case management services for some. And upon admittance to our program, our resident services office would also be a resource. And so the case management, we're not going after and asking for funds to help meet that need. But the Housing Authority has always been known to not be, we do not offer emergency housing. That is not what we're able to do because of the needs in our community. There is a wait list, and I predicted and looked into the individuals who, 2 of them, the households, have been on our wait list since 2019. But my prediction is that it's going to be about a 9 to 12 month wait before these families would have access to subsidy through our programs. And so the request is for $106,000. 53 of that we asked the county to help. And then we're asking the city of Lawrence through some emergency funds to help cover the other $53,000. We would go through our housing incorporation and not set up a new program, but just to have a means to be able to subsidize the emergency funds until they come up on our wait lists. And so this ask is for emergency crisis funding. It is not an ongoing program we're developing. I feel that this has been a real loss, and it was hard to hear that we lost this money and this permanent supportive housing, as we need about 200 units. We were so excited with the cottages and the small expansion that we got with Hope House that we had 12 new units. That was a big deal, and then we lose 14, which has been really difficult news for all of us in the field. We reached out to the coordinated entry to see if there's any options there. And the Kansas Homeless Coalition reached out yesterday or Friday's meeting to ask if there are any other agencies within the balance of state that would have resources to assist. No agencies identified funding at this time for that ask. So I'm here desperately asking for some support with the city and from the county to partner with us to keep these families housed, as it would cost twice as much if there was access to shelter, and we have not identified beds that would be available for these families losing their housing. So it's really just an unfortunate situation, and the COVID situation's obviously made it more complicated. So I'm here to answer any questions you might have for these families today.
Questions for Nikki?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Nikki, just one clarification that I wanted to ask. It looks like based on the information that was submitted, that this grant typically ran July 1 through June 30. So if this is funded by the city and also the county, that would provide the funding necessary through June of 2021. Is that correct?
It wouldn't go quite that long. As I was looking at the different cost analysis, I know 2 families should be eligible for our general housing. They have long-term rental history, and they've been on the wait list since 2019. And so it's kind of a breakdown. So yeah, I think some of the families will need that assistance potentially, depending on our other funding streams, for a year. Whereas, it looks like 2 households maybe for 4 months. So that's where the breakdown of costs came from. So, and that's, I can only predict our wait list. It has so many variables. It's always very difficult. I think some of the recent awards I received from HUD for permanent vouchers are going to help move that wait list quick, and these families would be eligible for that. But yeah, I think it's I'm pretty confident on that cost. It may come short a little, it may go over a little. And the cost of potentially having to move families would be something we would address as well. So. And all but one household, I think, one household may need a permanent supportive housing model, so we could look into, our other resources for that extra support that family might need. So,
Other questions for Nikki? Nikki, if you could stay available if other questions come up,
Absolutely.
I appreciate that.
Ron, this is
Yeah.
Mark.
Yes.
Justice Matters. I guess I got a question. I think confirming that this would be basically a 1-year funding, not a permanent thing, and you guys would be looking for a different funding source for the following year, just to confirm that.
Absolutely. So, we have a plan for that. All 14 families will be submitting applications. I think most of them have them as of today, so they're just now entering into our waitlist programs. And some will be served in our transitional housing program through the city home transitional, because if they were imminently, or maybe one family may be able to go into our permanent supportive housing. But the others, I will say kudos to Salvation Army, because there has been a lot of good work, and to the families. They've stabilized where they may not need to go into that level of transitional housing. And so they will just be referred to our general Section 8. And that is a very secure funding stream. We are not asking for funding for these families after this amount. This will be the only time. We just don't have the capacity to be able to quickly get them enrolled. There's no avenue for that. And there are, I checked with Catholic Charities ESG funds, and, putting Spient together did not feel very stable, nor would it meet the need. So we've been all pretty tapped with our resources during this time as we scurried and worked very hard to get these families out of the shelter during COVID as we had to. So there just wasn't the available funds in our community. So,
Dana, I believe you had a question.
Statement of the importance this Project ABLE program has been historically to our community. You may not have heard of it before, but it was kind of it was the only place where people who had severe disabilities that impacted their ability to have additional income, it was one of the only, or if the only program where we could get them housed before. This is a last line of defense program. It has been historically. The fact that people have remained stably housed is enormous, and it states a great deal of hard work by the families and the agencies that have supported this program historically. The shelter is right now, because of COVID, not doing family intake, and Family Promise right now currently is serving 79 different families, 249 people, 161 children because of this COVID crisis. Many of those are in our stabilization and prevention program. So I just want to sound the alarm of how critical this program is to not add another 14 households into this crisis situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you,
And
Dana.
that's absolutely right. Permanent supportive housing is one of the few programs where somebody just has nothing, can go straight into a housing stability. It has a housing first model, and it's one of the few that you would be able to help somebody with zero income. And then the way it works is these folks have stabilized in the program by getting their Social Security, disability, and other sources of income to try and build so they can be able to access other housing. So in the end, these families will be success stories as long as we don't return them to homelessness. They really will. And so thanks for making those points, Dana.
Other comments from the board? Diane, I do have a question about timing and process. If we make a recommendation favorable today, is there an opportunity to get before the City Commission yet before the end of the month?
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Yes, Mr. Chair, I think we could forward the recommendation to the City Commission at their meeting, not this week, but next week.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Nikki. Don't go away.
I won't.
Any discussion from the board?
Thomas Hound, Lawrence Board of Realtors. I think that if we have the ability to do this, that we should move forward. This seems to really serve our mission, helping people, you know, with affordable housing. So I would strongly support this as an endeavor.
Thank you, Tom. I do have a comment. Ron Gacious, AHAB Chair. I do have a comment that I'd like to make regarding process. The board's had several discussions about our funding cycle and the importance of some predictability so that agencies and individuals that might be requesting funds would know what the process is, know what the timing is, understand what the pool of available funds might be. We had further discussion about that issue when we had the Penn Street Lofts request in front of us here just a couple of months ago. And we decided at that time, and this is my generalization of what I think is the consensus opinion, we decided during that decision making that the opportunity in front of us was sufficiently important and the timing of the commitment was needed, that we would depart from our regularly scheduled cycle to make a recommendation on funding that project. I view this as another solid grounds for creating an exception to our funding cycle. If we can't be something of a relief valve for the community when there are urgent needs, then I don't know where else those folks can go. I think we can play an important role at times in addressing urgent needs, and I view this as one that is very legitimate very important to address. And I just can't imagine that we would want these 14 families to move back into a state of homelessness or housing uncertainty. I think it's our charge to try and solve that problem, not contribute to it. Yes, Dana.
Thank you for reminding me, Dana Ortiz of Family Promise of Lawrence. I neglected that last time. I actually said 14 families, but I think there are 27 households, Nikki. Is that accurate on Project ABLE?
No, there are 27 individuals served
Individuals,
in
okay.
14
Thank you.
households. Yeah.
I wanted the clarification. Thank you.
Any other comments from board members? Chair would entertain a motion to address this issue.
Rebecca Buford with Tenants to Homeowners. I move to recommend to the City Commission support of this program funding. And I really appreciate, given that it's out of our funding cycle, that the folks really tried to, or looked at and gave us the research of looking at other alternative sources of funding and asking the county as well. So I think it's very appropriate that we jump in and fund this. So I move to recommend that we fund this.
So
We have a second.
Monty Soka with Justice Matters, I would second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. Any further discussion by board members? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Diane, do we need to do roll call for these kinds of issues?
Mr. Chair, I think that you're okay the way that you handled the other motion. So if you'd like to handle it the same way, if we need to do roll call, we can do that after the vote to make sure that we've captured it correctly.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Hearing none, the recommendation passes unanimously. Patrick, I have a question for you regarding the process with the county. Is there an opportunity for me to appear before the county or submit a comment in support of this recommendation for their agenda tomorrow?
You could definitely submit something by writing. That's an option. You could also join us on our county commission meeting via Zoom. Since it's a regular agenda item, you could provide public comment at that time. I'll also be there, and I usually will share sort of a little bit about our deliberations here with affordable housing each week after our meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Pat. Thank you all very much, Board, for a strong vote in support of this recommendation. I think it's an important step for our community.
I really appreciate it. Thank you all so much for saving these folks with your recommendations.
Thank you, Nikki. Your organization's done a great job of putting together information needed for us to make this determination, this recommendation. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
The next item on our agenda is rather generic. It says policy discussion. And Diane, I'm not sure if there's a specific policy you have in mind or if this is intended to be an opportunity just for open discussion of policy.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. At your meeting, and my memory's failing me a little bit. I think it was in January at your retreat. You talked a little bit about having some general policy discussions amongst the board on your agenda. And so we wanted to just put this placeholder here. We didn't have any particular topic for you today, but you all may want to talk about slating any policy discussion topics that you would like for future agendas, and then that way we can make sure to note that on the agenda, and also if there's any relevant background material for your meeting that anyone wishes to share, they could do so in advance.
Ron Gacious, AHAB Chair. I assume staff is coming back to us with some additional information regarding the Lawrence Home Builder Association recommendations
Yes,
at some future time.
we do have that slated for your July meeting, along with the Wheatland Investments Performance Agreement. Those are the two items for that July meeting coming back before you.
Okay, thank you. Board members, are there policy issues that you would like to either start a discussion about today or identify for future discussions at our meetings?
Chair, if I
Yes.
may, this is Christina Gentry. I am from the Lawrence Douglas County Health Department. I wanted to recognize that I did not add an agenda for discussion that talks about our emergency funds, as we just did, but I wanted to add an emergency funding support we may be able to consider. So before we move on to policies, I was wondering if I would be able to have a chance to speak on some issues and some other resources and some things that have been going on in our community as I've been listening to our community speak. So before we move on to policies, I wonder if I could have some time to speak on some things that I've written out and just to share with the group before we move on.
Certainly, please go right ahead.
Thank you very much. Okay, so systemic racism and sexism, along with a low minimum wage, decimated state and federal social safety nets, means that poverty is both reversible and escalating. COVID-19 has exploded the statistics and widened social injustices. From March 14th to March 21st, Kansas unemployment claims went from 1,820 to 23,925. These are big numbers, and I realize our goal with the AHAB is to not only to create affordable housing in Lawrence, Douglas County, but that the people who are housed can remain housed. I think we just heard about that right now, about some recognition to wanting to do that and use emergency funds for that reason. Everything that we do from this point forward must be in the context of COVID-19. We've talked about community AMI and about the demographics who are experiencing the highest poverty in our community. The pandemic has exacerbated, these inequities. So I'm always posing myself with the position of a myriad of questions, one of those being, what can we do immediately to assist our residents? I think we're asking ourselves those questions. I'm also asking myself, what are the things and what are the people and who are the people in our community who are doing those things and are making those works happen? According to our journal World, in June 2, 2020, Kansas no longer shields people from evictions or foreclosures. As Kansas faces economic insecurity, Lawrenceans need to have security in their housing. 10 executive orders were reissued, but not the Executive Order 2010. And as of June 2nd, 2020, 66 Kansas cities and counties are to receive community development block grants to support COVID-19 response. Our Governor Kelly, and I'll quote, says, "Our communities need relief and they need it now." The grants that were available in these two categories that were distributed were for economic development and for meal programs. Those economic development could include working capital expenses such as inventory, wages, and utilities. The recipients were listed alphabetically, starting with Abilene County, who was awarded $132,000. Dodge City was awarded $132,000 as well, all the way down to Wilson County, that was also awarded $132,000. I did not see mention of Douglas County on the list of grant recipients. I am left to gather that it's because these were grants for small, predominantly rural communities in Kansas. Our demographic of minoritized identities is small in comparison to its white counterparts. According to our 2018 Health Equity Report, we are a Douglas County of 120,793 residents. 96,785 of those residents, or 80%, are self-described as white. There are a population of 7,746 Hispanic Latinx, self-described. We have an Asian population of 6,638. Our population of Black residents represents 5.4, and our indigenous population is 2.6 demographically. So what that says to me is 20% of Douglas County is non-white. When we take into consideration the lack of safe spaces we have for folks of color in Douglas County, I would argue that the BIPOCs, that's the Black, Indigenous, people of color, are living a rural life in an urban area. So there are needs, and there needs to be resources allocated specifically to our community experiencing the most inequity. I think we should explore collaboration with the community collectives that are and other nonprofits doing the work already. Folks like Rent Zero, and you can find out more information if you Google them and look up commission information, and Lawrence Mutual Aid Network. Those are things, and I'm not responsible or representative for either one of those programs, organizational collectives, but I know the impact they have on our community is a positive one. We do have ECAN and other collectives and other Catholic charities, but there are barriers for those recipients or those allocations of those resources to our residents. For instance, for Catholic charities, you can only go once a month, and they're helpful, but you need to call ahead in order to get assistance for rent and utilities. So I wanted to just point out that there are some organizations and collectives that are doing the work for people who are experiencing or could experience homelessness, increase in utility and expenses. And I think we should also just look into those and look into what we can do to help and support those organizations and those collectives. Thank you.
Christina, what was the name of the first organization you mentioned, the collective?
Sure. Rent Zero. And I don't have information. Rent Zero, they have been doing some very fabulous work in trying to de-escalate homelessness and also working to get the executive orders and to make sure that there's extension for people who have become behind in their rent and the late fees that are incurred with people who are trying to pay their rent through to, well, because of the COVID situation, everything needs to be looked at in that sense. And I think they're doing a great work in trying to help alleviate some of the things that happen along this pandemic for people who have to pay rent.
Very good, thank you.
This is Edith Guffey, and I had something else I wanted to talk about, but it really builds on what Christina has already said. And it's a conversation about policies. And I wonder if the way we're operating, or maybe the way that we've not thought about operating, presents some barriers to these kinds of groups for not applying for dollars. Is there something institutionally that we are doing that doesn't give an open invitation, or that these groups have not come for assistance to AHAB? So that's looking at reaching out to them is one thing, which I think is great. But I also want to make sure that there's something that we need to know that's preventing these organizations from reaching out to us. Is it our process? Is it how we advertise? I simply don't know. But I think it's important. The second piece that I was going to name is like it, but not identical. And it refers back to, Ron, the statement you made at the very beginning about how AHAB can be engaged in these conversations about systemic racism. And I really would like for us to take a look at the policies that are in place for those who receive dollars from AHAB. Is there a requirement for unconscious bias training for those who are running the program, for staff, for all, that we look through every lens that we have when people come to us for dollars, that we start looking at it also, not just about the financial need, but about how do we assess their commitment to eliminating systemic racism. That becomes one of the prisms that we commit to. I know the city is advertising for, what is it called, an equity officer? I don't know quite the title, but surely that would be a resource for us if we choose to go this direction. But I certainly would like for us to consider it.
Excellent comments, ladies. Diane, that creates a question in my mind. I'm sorry, Ron Gacious, AHAB Chair. Diane, that creates a question in my mind. Do we have any requirements on those organizations and individuals that we fund their programs or initiatives? Do we have any ability to or have any current training programs that we might be able to refer them to, encourage them to participate in, or possibly even make participation in bias training a component part of our agreements?
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. That's a great question. I know that there's a number of agreements that the city has, which we do have certain requirements that point to non-discrimination that we pass on from the city. As to the exact wording in the AHAB agreements, I would need to relook at those, and I certainly can do that to make sure that language is there. There has been a long tradition at the city of providing annual diversity training to all employees, and it's been part of our culture that's been very important for more than a decade that I'm aware of, and I don't know exactly when it started, but it's been quite a lengthy period of time. There hasn't been that requirement to have that considered for advisory boards, but that may be a consideration to look at. As you all can imagine, the topic of equity and inclusion is a very important and timely topic that a lot of boards are engaging in. We have several boards who have some of this work directly in their purview, and of course, all of the boards have this issue touch them in one way or another. I would encourage this board to, keep your ears open as to how other broad city policies might apply to this board and others in the future. There undoubtedly will be important changes as we continue to look at the importance of these issues. Christina mentioned that the city is hiring a director of equity and inclusion. I believe Edith mentioned that as well. That is a position that's currently open. So our intention with that is to be much more direct and intentional of having someone in our organization be looking at every aspect of things that the city does with a lens of equity and inclusion. So I think there's a lot of opportunities also with that position and the ability of that person to have an impact on how we do our work broadly and who we're serving and how. And those will be important issues. I did also want to just mention to you a couple of things that I thought of as you all were making your comments that may be important to the discussion. Christina, related to the community development block grant funding, you are correct that the list that you saw from the state is only those communities that did not have a direct allocation. Lawrence is large enough to have received its own allocation of additional CDBG monies through the CARE Act. Those monies that we received as a community was just a little under $500,000, and per the city commission's direction and working with the unified command that had been set up to address COVID-19, those monies were prioritized for human services. So much of the exact demographic that you were talking about, us making sure that we didn't forget with COVID-19. So that has been important. And I also did want to mention that the unified command, and that is the emergency management response of the community to COVID-19, which included the collaboration of the county, the Lawrence Douglas County Health Department, the city, and also LMH Health, working together to make sure that we were addressing the immediate needs of the community with our response to the virus. That structure of the Unified Command has recently shifted, and this week they will be beginning a team that is looking at recovery issues related to COVID-19. So there's a couple of things that are happening with that group that are of interest to AHAB and others. There's several groups that will be working on various important issues ongoing. And of interest to this group, there is an ongoing group looking at human services and the social service needs of people that have been affected by COVID-19. So that is an important group to engage with. And I'm working with Steve Kelly with the Chamber of Commerce on the group that is looking at economic recovery. And there's several other groups that are also part of that structure. But the work of those groups will be important going forward as our community continues to look at how we can make the best recovery. And I will note that it was of great importance when that was set up to have a team of equity advisors on each of the groups that were formed. So the equity advisors will be looking to make sure that equity and inclusion are forefront in the discussions that all of these different groups are having. And I just thought that information, if you hadn't heard it, might be helpful to this discussion.
Ron Gacious, AHAB Chair. Diane, who's heading up the working group on social services?
Mr. Chair, I'll have to get back with you on that. I don't recall off the top of my head, and I don't know whether anyone else on this call happens to know that off the top. I know some of the names were still being solidified on the group. So if anybody else knows off the top, please comment. Oh, Danny might, looks like.
Dana,
This is Danny Walters with the City of Lawrence. Yeah, the Recovery Human Services Group, if I'm not mistaken, and Dana, you can nod at me if I'm right, first meeting is this afternoon. This afternoon or tomorrow, one of the two. And the people heading that up are Jill Jolliker and then our own Shannon Oury. So.
Very good. Okay.
This is Edith Guffey. I have a question. That's really wonderful information. Thank you, Diane. My question is, I really appreciate the equity advisors on each of these committees, but I don't make the assumption that an equity advisor is also a person of color. So I was wondering if, how much attention was paid to there being diverse committee of each of these settings, in each of these committees.
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I think there was quite a lot of thought that went into the people that were asked to be equity advisors. And again, I'm sorry that I'm not familiar with all the names and the people who've been assigned in the various roles. But there's a good cross section of people, and I can certainly follow up once those names have been solidified with who those people are and a little bit more about the structure of that group, if that's of interest to AHAB.
And this is Christina Gentry. I can maybe add a little bit to that discussion of who those equity officers are, and I think it's okay to say the names here if they've made themselves public. The equity officers, as we're talking about in this space, as a recovery group for COVID city. For our city is Jasmine Moore and Sarah Hartzig, both who have been working in equity at the Lawrence Douglas Health Department, but there are 2 open positions that they're advertising for. And so they have been asking other equity groups, specifically people of color, to volunteer for that position.
Thank you, Christina. That's excellent information, and Edith, a great question. I'm not surprised that our community is actively moving forward on some of these issues, but we should continue to nudge them and ask questions to ensure that the opportunities don't slide by for increased diversity and inclusion in the review and decision-making of the important allocation of resources and energy that's going to take place in the months ahead. Other comments or questions about policy issues?
This is Monty Soka of Justice Matters. I think to maybe take some actionable action, I guess, on Edith's comment about, how are we as a team, as we evaluate these proposals, making sure that we are appropriately weighting, projects that impact these at-risk populations. So I think that's something that we can, I don't know if we solve it today, but we can certainly put it on for a discussion another date, or we could have it today. But how do we get that into our evaluation process? We also already weight, if it's for disabled individuals, we have a little bit of weighting in there, and we give them a little more emphasis. So certainly we can figure out how to get this put into our normal process, our evaluation and decision-making process. And again, that's not the end all, but it's certainly something we can do soon and have some impact.
It seems like, Rebecca Buford with Tenants to Homeowners, it seems like anyone applying for funds would be able to talk about who they serve relative to the population, how many people of color they serve, or people with disabilities. I mean, some of those most marginalized that institutional racism affects them being able to get those services, and how do we take steps to do affirmative fair housing marketing, for example, in different forms. So those are all things that I think, unfortunately, a lot of the applicants think, have to think about this often in a good way, and do, and have good answers for that. But I love the idea of having a equity question that we can weight in some way on every application, because that is something, and even to the extent of the leadership of that organization or for-profit business, how representative are they of, it just gives us a sense of who's making decisions, and does that have an equity lens? So I think that's an easy question to add to the application, exactly how we score that, but it certainly would be good information to get when we're making decisions.
And my thought is it would be an easy box to add to our scoring matrix, so that we ensure that the issue is in front of us as we're making decisions about allocation of trust fund dollars. And
Mr. Chair, this is Patrick Kelly.
Yes,
just
sir.
a comment on that. I almost asked Nikki during her application that very question, is how many of the families served were families of color. I would want to follow up with Diane and possibly legal counsel on if there's any anti-discrimination policies within the city of Lawrence that we want to be aware of. And if we want to address them in some ways. In some ways, I get concerned that, those policies are often written with the idea of equality and not equity. And what we're talking about is equity. And I just want to really think about striving for equity over equality and how those policies may impact the things we're talking about doing.
This is Sarah Waters from the University of Kansas. I will note that in the presentation earlier, she did state actually that 12 adults were from minority populations. So she did say that, but she didn't clarify what that meant, because I had some similar thoughts to what Patrick just said, and didn't do a follow-up to that statement that was given during her brief verbal presentation.
Edith Guffey again. I really am encouraged by the direction of the conversation, and I think it will be easy to put a question in our process about who is served. I would like to talk about this at our retreat, because I'm also going for a deeper level of expectation and requirement, other than just how many people of color do you serve. Mm-hmm. Because even when you serve a number of people of color, you are still very deeply engaged in systemic racism. And you may be blind on your own part, unconsciously, about how you're doing that. So I would be interested in a conversation that has both of those aspects, and one that we're probably not equipped to have today.
Edith, I agree. I think that'd be a great retreat topic to spend some time on. And perhaps we would have our new director of inclusion on board by then, and could participate in that part of our meeting, or perhaps all of our meeting. Other comments? Great discussion. Yes, Dana.
To follow up on one of the things Edith asked early on about policies and such, are there things that we're doing as AHAB that might inhibit others from applying? It's again that discussion of services versus housing units on the ground. Mm-hmm. And in the midst of all of this, it mm-hmm. just, to me, it raises that issue again. Vouchers versus houses on the ground, new units. And we did a sway. We've gone kind of both directions. Mm-hmm. COVID shows how clearly important, from a basic health, dignity, human stance, housing is for people. And not everybody can buy a house, and not everyone can afford a house. So what do we do with that? And as an Affordable Housing Advisory Board, I'd really like to see us grapple with that. Mm-hmm. And putting social services up against housing unit and development is not a fair comparison, I think, for our mm-hmm. organization. Mm-hmm. They're not apples and apples, and we need to really address that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That would be an excellent extension of the discussion for our retreat. Yes, Rebecca.
Yeah, I really support Dana's ideas, and that the other, Christina asked a good question of, what are we doing for COVID? And I would almost say, I love that we supported the request today, but would it be appropriate for some of the funding, for us to even consider around before the November round of just services that are providing direct housing relief? The world is just so different than when we discussed our calendar and our funding cycle, even at the beginning of this year. So, because I am aware of a lot of organizations and programs that have just formed in the last month or two to address COVID recovery, specifically with housing, and those programs are needing money. So that is one way we could directly be a part of the COVID recovery effort that I can see, even if it's a small chunk of funding that we say, gosh, this is going to go to COVID services now, not wait till first of next year as far as funding allocation, which seems like a lifetime away at this point.
Excellent points. Other comments? Well, I think we've started some excellent discussions to be continued in July and the months ahead. And any recommendations that folks have to address some of the issues that have popped up. For example, Christina, if we're missing organizations that are out there active in the space that overlaps with what AHAB is doing, help guide us as to how to best reach out to them. I know, I'm retired. I've got time to go meet with anyone that wants to put two people and a cup of coffee together. And I know Shannon is also active in the community all the time, meeting with folks. And I look across this Zoom board and I see, a dozen great communicators and advocates for what we're doing. All of you, I think, would take time to meet with an individual or an organization that reached out to us. We need to make sure that we're making ourselves available and be a little bit more proactive in looking for those opportunities to inform folks about what we're doing, what resources are available, and how they might be able to plug in. I certainly don't want any good programs to go lacking for support because we simply didn't hear about them. And this is a good discussion for us to continue as we move forward and make recommendations on what to do with our trust fund dollars.
Thank you, Ron. This is Christina Gentry. I'll just respond to that quickly because I do understand that there has been barriers or are barriers to some of our small collectives in obtaining funds. For example, we were just awarded a mini grant opportunity and we were approved for a grant that came from Kansas Health Foundation in the amount of $18,900 to help and alleviate some of and go direct funding to alleviate the COVID responses and COVID-related responses to our residents, and we awarded those to Lawrence Mutual Aid Network. But it was also a barrier to try to get the funds to them, right? They're not a 501c3, and so those are some of the things I think we could talk about as far as barriers that prevent funding from reaching and direct actions that we could take for what we do and look to our policies and how our policies are also helping or creating barriers to get the money and the funds to people who need it the most.
Thank you. Other comments under policy discussion? Seeing none, let's move to item D on our agenda, other new business. I think we've already kind of spilled over into some other new business. Anything that any board member would like to add or staff under the category of other new business? Diane, did you or Jeff or other staff have anything that you wanted to raise under this agenda item?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chair, not at this time.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring your attention to calendar items. Our next meeting will be July 13th. Diane, do you have any expectation at this time whether that will be another Zoom meeting or an opportunity to meet in person? And if so, what that might look like? Is the city creeping up slowly on face-to-face meetings? Or I'm pretty comfortable with Zoom, and I checked the box about 4 different ways of being a vulnerable target for the virus. So I'm not trying to push us or anyone into face-to-face meetings, but I just wanted to know if there's any kind of a timeline that the city's looking at for a return to face-to-face meetings.
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Great question, Mr. Chair, and I would say continue to stay tuned because sometimes these things change daily depending on, what's happening with the virus and as the rules end up changing. But we have been opening back up. In fact, this is the first day that City Hall is again open and several of our facilities. We anticipate the City Commission will be transitioning to kind of their typical meeting format in July. I believe we recognize that there's going to need to be some element of participation and some ability to support this kind of format for people who are still unable to get out or may not be willing to do that. So exactly how that looks a month from now, I'd encourage you all to stay tuned. We'll have some more information, but overall at this point, if we continue to move the way we're moving, I'd anticipate there being back to kind of regular meeting format, understanding that regular will know in July what that means.
Very good, thank you. Having no other business before the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all very much for your participation. Great discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you.